I'm Sam Roberts of the New York Times. Welcome to the New York Times Close Up. It's been another tumultuous week for all Americans. More examinations, reflections on who we are and aren't. In a moment, we'll talk with my New York Times colleague, opinion page columnist Paul Krugman. He's reflected on the most recent rise of hate crimes, crimes that have appalled us all. Then Brooklyn Borough President Eric L explains why he'll bring a gun the next time he goes into a church or mosque or synagogue. My Times colleagues discuss the week's events and do some prophesizing about the coming election on the backstory, and I'll have some additional thoughts on Coda. But first, New York Times opinion columnist Paul Krugman. He's also, of course, distinguished professor of economics here at the City University Graduate Center. Paul, you're writing in the Times about the lies of this administration. What concerns me about the lies of this administration, and we know, of course, that most politicians lie at one point or another, but this administration seems to have so many, which is one concern, and so many people don't seem to care, which is another concern.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's not really true that all politicians lie. I mean, spin, yes. Every administration, every politician tries to put a favorable light, maybe present stuff in a misleading way, but outright lying, you have very, very few outright lies from Barack Obama. There were some things where you could say, you know, he slightly misstated the case, but nothing like this. It's a complete blizzard of lies, everything. Is there a single thing that Republicans are running on in this midterm election that isn't a lie? Is there any true thing that they're saying? I can't think of one. So, and yeah, people don't, I mean, many people do care, but many people don't, partly because it's all about tribe. It's anything that serves the narrative that my tribe is better and other people are doing us wrong seems to be accepted no matter how demonstrably false it is.
Now, how do you figure tribe? Is it race? Is it ethnicity? It's not party anymore, is it?
Well, those are all unfortunately kind of converging. It's all ending up being the same thing. But no, it's right. I mean, this is a white nationalist, you know, let's say we have a white nationalist government right now. And its closing pitch in the midterm election is pure white nationalism. It's racism, which is becoming overt. It's all about white, and of course it's white, not just white, but white Christian nationalist identity, as always. You know, whenever the old Tom Lehrer song, National Brotherhood Week, and everybody hates the Jews. So in the end, the Jews are, anti-Semitism goes along with it. So that's what it is. It's that line. And identity politics, you know, people always attack the left for identity politics, but the real identity politics that matters is white Christian identity politics.
Is it racial hatred or is it racial opportunism and cynicism?
Oh, there's a lot of actual hatred out there. I mean, the politicians pushing this stuff are opportunists and cynics. You know, there's a lot of, you know, is Trump a racist? Is DeSantis a racist? And the answer is, I don't know. Doesn't matter. The point is, they're playing on it. They're going for the racist vote.
You say in the column the other day that Democrats, to some extent, are just as liable for the explosion of hatred. What did you mean?
Did I say that?
In some sense, yeah. Or
no, I hope I didn't say that because I don't mean that.
Well,
no, I mean it's.
I mean, are they contributing to the atmosphere at all?
I don't think so. I don't think in any important way. There's no way to diffuse it. There's no way to say, let's be reasonable, let's find some middle ground. There is no middle ground.
So should they be taking the low road or sticking to the high road?
I'm not even sure I know what the high road is here.
Anymore.
You have to respond to it. I mean, now if you look at what's actually happening in the campaign, Democrats, you know, the Democratic message is basically healthcare, 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 and they're hardly talking about identity politics at all. They're not even running a campaign saying, don't vote for these people because they're peddling hatred. And there's a question whether they should be doing that. I wouldn't call that going the low road. I think, but there's some argument that they should be making more of a pitch for, you know, that not just that these people are going to take away your health care, which is true, but maybe also these are bad people, should be part of their message.
You say that white men in particular are worried about losing their status, many of them doing reasonably well at this point. Why are they so worried?
Well, I think part of it is that man does not live by bread alone. And it's not just whether you have, there are lots, look, there are a lot of wealthy white men who seem incredibly worked up about, that somehow the dark-skinned people are going to take stuff away from me. There's a Lou Dobbs component to all of this. What's that about? And I think the answer is that status is not just about money. And a lot of it is that the ability of people to feel threatened when someone who looks different from them, who seems to not be of their tribe, is out there making gains, even if you're making gains too, is enormous. There's a lot of darkness in the human soul that I think we failed to appreciate fully until now.
Is it any different than when Southern Europeans, Eastern Europeans were coming in a century or more ago?
Well, there's a lot of overlap. It's very similar. I mean, here we are. We're at CUNY right now, and CUNY is an institution that's always been the gateway, and the ethnicity changes, but the mission stays the same. And there was a lot of it. I mean, I have to say, there seems to be, I don't know, for whatever reason, the guardrails on democracy seem weaker now. There was a lot of prejudice against Southern and Eastern Europeans in the early 20th centuries, but we didn't think of American democracy as being on the edge of collapse, and now we kind of do.
If the Democrats take the House, and these are a lot of ifs before Tuesday, what should their agenda be for the next 2 years?
Well, they have to keep on laying out a policy agenda. But of course, they will not be able to make anything happen. They know they can pass legislation in the House, but it will be blocked in the Senate or vetoed by the White House. So they have to lay out a vision, but they also have to exercise oversight. I mean, this is why the final stages of this campaign are so frantic on the part of the Republicans, because we will have Democrats with subpoena power, and they should use it.
On what issue? What's the first issue they should use it on?
Oh, I mean, there's a whole raft of them, but I would say just as a political judgment, they should use it for corruption on the part of the Trump administration. There's never been anything like this. The raw violation of the emoluments clause is a new thing.
Paul Krugman, thank you for joining us. Of course, you could read his column in the New York Times on the op-ed page Tuesday, Friday, and nytimes.com. Coming up, Brooklyn Borough President Eric Adams. Welcome back. Joining us now, Brooklyn Borough President Eric Adams. After last Saturday's rampage at a synagogue in Pittsburgh, he said he would carry a gun whenever he went to a house of worship. The borough president is a retired police department captain. He recommended that fellow officers do the same. Why carry a gun then, and would you carry it all the time?
No, I never really carried it all the time. People used to actually laugh when I was a cop that I would rarely even carry it. And it's really sad when you think about it that in the most sacred place, our houses of worship are now under attack. In the last 10 years, we have approximately 140 shootings inside our houses of worship, and that's a large number. And my goal is to be clear. How do we use pre-existing relationships to create a safe environment inside our houses of worship? Police officers now are strongly recommended to carry their firearms 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Many of them do already carry in their houses of worship. We need to continue to look at how do we connect that with those who run the services, allow our law enforcement officers who attend houses of worship to sit in right places in their houses of worship, communicate with the staff there, whoever's the imam, the pastor, or the rabbi, so that we can create a safe environment in our houses of worship.
I'm not sure we should be encouraging this or not, but why limit it to houses of worship if this is a good idea? Why not schools? Why not theaters? Why not any places of public assembly?
Well, you do, actually. When a police officer goes to the supermarket, when he goes to the theater, when he goes anywhere, he has his firearm with him. And last year, this communication actually started last year when a group of pastors called me and stated, what could we do to secure our houses of worship? And I told them, take inventory of your law enforcement officers and ensure that they be part or become part of your services. Now, I want to be clear. This is not for permit holders. You have people in the city who they may possess a target permit or they may be a permit holders. They are not trained to deal with the evacuation of emergency situation, and they don't know how to respond. If you read our tabloids, you will see that oftentimes police officers who are off duty, they take the necessary action and they stop the violence from happening. Now, Sam, I wish I lived in the country where we didn't have to have this conversation, but the reality we do. The incident that took place on the West Side Highway a year ago, that individual was stopped with a handgun. Mm-hmm. The reality is that we want a country without handguns, but until we reach that point, those of us who are given the right to carry 24 hours of the day, we need to use it not only to protect ourselves, but to also to protect the public.
So assemblymen shouldn't be running around carrying handguns all the time, like Dov Hikind, who said he's going to get a license so he can carry one in his house of worship.
No, I think it's more than a firearm. Having a firearm that's not in the hands of a well-trained person that understands what it is to be in a stressful environment and has gone through extensive training is not a safe environment. What we know that whenever there's a police officer on the scene, after you have an incident like this, an officer can immediately bring that to a termination, the threat to a termination, and you save the lives of countless number of people. And keep in mind, having handguns inside houses of worship is not new. Every time a mayor, a public advocate, a controller enters a church, those men who walk in with them, they're carrying their firearms. Or even when we have services inside the church with uniformed personnel, they are carrying their firearms also.
We still have too many shootings, of course. Is there any way to curb guns, curb bullets? You're a former cop, you've seen it on the street, you've seen it since then. Is there any hope of being able to do that?
I am optimistic, but I am cautiously optimistic. When I was in the state Senate, I led the charge about dealing with illegal handguns and the over-proliferation of handguns, particularly coming from our southern state. Many of our southern states are not willing to make any real changes. I showed how easy it was to bring a high-capacity assault rifle down Broadway and enter it right into New York City area. In New York City, we have stringent laws, but those laws do not translate into throughout New York State or outside of New York State as well, particularly in the southern state. So it's a real daunting task, and until we reach that point, a family that sits inside a house of worship or a movie theater or a supermarket, they need to know that their families could be safe. And what we have found is that having a well-trained officer on or off duty is the best way to ensure that that happens.
At the same time we're talking about stricter gun control, we're loosening some other laws on fare beating, on smoking or possessing pot. Is that a good idea?
It depends on how we do it. I think fare beating, yes. No one should be criminalized merely because they don't have enough money to enter our transportation system. And that is why we need a reduced fare Metro card for them. I think when we started legalization of marijuana, I made it clear, I wrote an op-ed on this topic, that we cannot just do it in just a swift manner. We need to strategically look at it and make sure that we don't send the wrong signals, that using anything that will alter one's behavior should be open to the public without any type of regulations. I don't want my children starting their day smoking marijuana before they sit in the classroom. I don't want people to believe that they can operate a vehicle or some other type of equipment, yet they're using marijuana. The same rules we have around alcohol and other mind-altering drugs and behavior, we need to look at it when we talk about the legalization of marijuana.
A quick last question. We all want more affordable housing. Nobody wants more density and crowded neighborhoods. How do we reconcile the two, like the mayor and you have been trying to do in East New York?
That's a great question, because far too often people talk about dealing with the issue of homelessness and dealing with the issue of more affordable housing, but they end the sentence with build more but not on my block. We have to change that mindset and find ways of utilizing our avenues so that we can protect the inner communities in the smaller, low zone areas. But the only way we can really address the issue of affordable housing, which is the #1 concern that many of us here, is to ensure that we start to build in a responsible way and zone in a responsible way as well.
Now, how do you persuade people of that?
It's about a conversation. It's about understanding that when we talk about homelessness, these are our former neighbors that have fallen on hard times, and we need to be part of ensuring that they have a place to live within the communities that they know and the support services that are there as well. So it's about a continuous conversation, utilizing our community boards and some of the local groups and advocates to push this conversation forward.
Thanks so much for joining us,
Thank you.
Eric Adams, the Brooklyn Borough President. And coming up next, the backstory. Welcome back. Another horrific week, made even more difficult by some of the president's attempts to divert attention from the massacre in a host of ways, even House Speaker Paul Ryan criticizing him. We're now down to a precious few days before the election. After months of cajoling, attacking, defending positions, here we are on our election night set. A reminder, we will be live election night from 9 to 11 here on CUNY TV. My Times colleagues, contributing writers Clyde Haberman and Eleanor Randolph, have covered more campaigns than any journalist I know. So what do we think? We are down to, again, just a couple of more days before. Do we think there will be an outpouring of Trump voters saying, you're not going to push us around? Or will the 2008 Obama wave come back out and say, you know, here we are again?
Yes. Well, you know.
Yes to which?
To both.
That's right. So, you know, the thing is that after 2016, I think a lot of us were sort of burned by we expected Hillary Clinton to be the first woman president of the United States. And those polls came in, you know, I mean, I remember as we talked about this, as the actual votes were coming in, their polls were still showing her 5 to 10 points ahead. So, you know, it's hard to know.
And in fact, she did win the popular vote.
Yes, she did, of course. But, you know, Trump is just throwing everything at the wall, trying to see what sticks. I mean, that you can see that's what he's doing. He's talking about a tax cut. He's talking about how, you know, he's going to change the Constitution by, you know, fiat.
Right.
And so, I mean, he's talking about doing all those things. And who knows whether the Democrats can bring out enough people to overcome the fact that they have been redistricted practically into oblivion. So we'll see, you know.
And fear works. And the Republicans consistently, and he's no different, play to the worst fears of people and the worst instincts, whether it was death panels involving Obamacare. Now it's this invasion, as they're calling it, of people coming from Latin America. He's using terms that are practically fascist, frankly. He's talked about an infestation. Those are only fascist or right-wing dictators who talk this way about people. And so we'll see how many people he scares with this boogeyman thing of these people that come in. A, they're about 1,000 miles away. They won't show up till December. And B, you know, everybody has an absolute right to seek refuge and asylum in this country. They don't necessarily have to be admitted. But this notion that they're coming to invade is, besides being offensive, is, I'm afraid, for all too many of our compatriots, effective.
Have the Democrats offered enough of an alternative?
Well, I think they've been really good on health care. A lot of the ads that we've seen in the last week and 10 days have focused on, you know, do you want the Republicans to take away your Affordable Care Act? You know, the Republicans are lying when they say that, you know, that they're going to allow you to keep your health care. And so that, and also that the Republicans are going to take away parts of Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid.
And they will.
And they will. They've said that. I mean, they've been on the record to say that. So, I mean, maybe fear works in that way too. I mean, to be afraid to lose your ability to go to the doctor and to the hospital that you care about.
Speaking of fear, why do people fear total Republican control in Washington, but those same people don't fear total Democratic control in Albany?
Well, they should dislike
question.
it, but there's a difference between fear and disliking. You know, maybe after the debate on New York One the other night between Letitia James and Keith Wofford, for example, Wofford, I watched it, I thought he handled himself quite well. Who knows? I don't think he's going to beat her, but he might put up a good showing. The state is obviously super Democrat, and she's very lucky in that regard because, frankly, I thought she came across as remarkably unlikable in this debate. She wouldn't even acknowledge him. She almost never even looked at him. It was as if he didn't even pronounce his name right. And if she did any more flips on the death penalty, she could qualify for the U.S. gymnastics team. I mean, she said, I'm against the death penalty, but she would understand it for the Pittsburgh synagogue shooter. Well, wait a second. That means you're for the death penalty, and now we're only talking about which situations.
Good question. Thanks to Clyde Haberman, Eleanor Randolph for joining us, and I'll add a few thoughts on Coda. Why vote if you live in New York City? This is pretty much a one-party town, unless you're in the Brooklyn and Staten Island congressional district, where Democrat Max Rose is challenging Dan Donovan, the Republican incumbent, or in the Brooklyn State Senatorial District, where Andrew Gennardis hopes to unseat Republican Martin Golden. But if you were thinking of staying home on Tuesday, what's happened around the country in the past week or so might just drive you to vote, to mark your ballot as a version of Howard Beale's rant in the film Network that you're mad as hell and you're not going to take it anymore, whatever it is that you're mad about. Two events from the past came to mind as Election Day approaches. One occurred in the late 18th century when New York City was the nation's capital. It concerns a trait that we seem to have taken for granted, forgotten, or merely pay lip service to nowadays. It's called tolerance. In June 1790, Shearith Israel in New York circulated a letter to other Jewish congregations suggesting they write to President Washington, expressing their appreciation for a government which, quote, to bigotry gives no sanction. As Tom Friedman noted in his Times column the other day, President Washington eventually replied in a letter to the congregation in Newport, Rhode Island. Washington went well beyond embracing toleration. He upheld religious liberty in the, quote, exercise of inherent natural rights. Washington wrote, may the children of the stock of Abraham who dwell in this land continue to merit and enjoy the goodwill of the other inhabitants, while everyone shall sit in safety under his own vine and fig tree, and there shall be none to make him afraid. Now, Washington wasn't perfect. He had more slaves toiling for him without pay on his plantation back home in Mount Vernon than federal employees working for his fledgling federal government. But his letter is a reminder of love over hate, of what it means to be an American, whether you were born here or uprooted yourself to build a better life for yourself and your descendants, or whether you fought for and perhaps sacrificed your life for your adopted country. November 11th is Veterans Day. This year, it's special. It's the centennial of the armistice that ended the Great War, as it was called when we hoped it would be the war to end all wars. That was before we had to rename it chronologically as World War I. No veterans of that war are still alive. Fewer than 1 million of the 16 million who served in World War II are still living. About 1.1 million Americans died in all our wars since the Revolution, nearly half of them in the Civil War, when intolerance tore the Union apart. If you don't vote for yourself on Tuesday, vote for them. The New York Times Close-Up began on New York One News in 1992, a long run for any television program. Doris Bergman, our executive producer, has been guiding us, wrangling our guests, and keeping us all together ever since. This is her last production. From all of us at the Times and CUNY TV, we sincerely thank her and wish her good luck and good health. For the New York Times and CUNY TV, I'm Sam Roberts.